Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of the Future of Work show. What we're going to be discussing today is a topic very close to my heart. It's about the design of thinking. Now, 4 months into the lockdown, if you're experiencing a certain mind fog or you aren't completely sure if your ways of thinking are really at their sharpest, you must know you're not alone. This is a very common experience in a situation as unusual as ours. And to help us figure some of this out and think through what might be better ways of working, I have with me today Professor Vijay Ghai, whom I'm just going to bring on. Hi, Professor Vijay Ghai. How are you?
Hi. Good afternoon. Wonderful. Pleasure to be there.
So let me introduce Vijay. Now, some of you might already know about him, but for others, he's been in the innovation and design space for over 25 years. The largest career stint was with HCL, and in HCL, he played roles like the Chief Innovation Officer, Head of at NIIT's consulting division. So he's been actually a practitioner. And then something unusual happened a few years ago. Something pulled at him, something tugged at him, and he became a design thinking evangelist. So, this is one of the rarest of rare transitions where someone who's really at the height of their corporate career and organizational success drops it all to explore an area which 5, 6 years ago was still relatively, new and hadn't entered our vocabulary in quite the same way. So, my first question to you is going to actually be around understanding this transition. It's such a rare thing, and it's so wonderful to see someone getting so honestly drawn to a set of ideas. So what is it that pulled you?
Well, I'd like to go back many, many years. When I graduated, I joined Hindustan Lever, and that was way back 39 years ago, actually. And the first thing that we experienced in Hindustan Lever was that whatever we designed, say I was a mechanical engineer and we designed machines for use in house. First thing that we were told was that if the people who you are designing for don't love your machine or your automation or your solution, you'll lose your job. And so the whole objective of any kind of automation or any kind of design that we were doing was it should benefit the people who you're designing for. If it requires a union negotiation to get something through, then it's a bad idea. Because the people should want it, they should love it. And so the whole idea of doing something because somebody wants it, somebody loves it, somebody will benefit from it, got ingrained at that time. And then when I transitioned to NIIT, part of the HCL group, as you rightly said, that was in '89. I stayed with them for 26 years. And during that time, we found that a huge amount of the software solution that we were developing were never used. And in the solution that were used, only a very tiny fraction of the features that we were building in were getting used. We were wasting a huge amount of time and effort. Of course, we got paid for it, so we were feeling good about it. But for the customer, they are waiting for much longer, paying a large amount of money, and then getting something that they're not using, large parts of it that they're not using. And so this led me to think that, look, something is fundamentally wrong. And we started exploring things like, how do you understand requirements in a way that the solutions that you deliver are going to be beneficial? And that, I think, laid the foundation for what is today known as design thinking. As a term, it's not very old, but I believe that the genesis is much, much older. So as long as we keep people at the center, as long as we keep the human need at the center, what is it that people are trying to do? What is it that they're struggling with? What is it that's painful for them? What is it they enjoy? What gives them the fear, the apprehension? What are they aspiring to do? If you understand all of that and then start taking decisions, I think that's pretty much all there is to design thinking. And so that drove me to go deeper and deeper into the subject. And then I decided, look, that's really where I want to be. So rather than apply it in a very narrow context of one organization, I thought, it's beneficial to, equip other people with this understanding so that when they take decisions and when they start influencing people who work with them, they keep some of these principles in mind and hopefully become better people. So the whole objective is not to make them more effective in their roles or their responsibilities, but just become better people. I mean, this is pretty much where I am today. So evangelizing and practicing design thinking is what I do.
You know, one of the things I've heard you speak about quite often, and I'm going to ask you a little bit about now, is this whole idea that design thinking is not a set of tools, but instead it's a way of thinking with some fundamental principles underlying it. So, given the fact that today we are in, I mean, an absolutely unusual set of circumstances where perhaps many familiar ways of thinking, working, aren't even the best ways for this time, how do you think some of these fundamental principles or underlying philosophies of design thinking can be helpful for all of us, for business leaders, for instance?
Well, let me step back. Before getting to the business leadership impact, let's look at it from an everyday perspective. We are rewarded for taking quick decisions. We have been encouraged to take quick decisions, and then as we grow up and get more and more experience, we start referring back to familiar patterns in our mind. You see a situation and you say, this, I've been there before, I know this, and I know exactly what the solution should be. I know exactly what I have to do. And so this need to jump to a solution, the need to jump to a resolution of a problem has been promoted all the way through our education, because you're given a limited time to answer questions in an examination, and if you can't get it there, then you failed. You're not given time to consider options. You're pretty much told that there is only one right answer that only the teacher knows and the teacher can give you, and so on and so forth. So when you start looking at the way our mind has been developed, we've been forced to develop this ability to very quickly jump from a problem to a solution. And all the design thinking does is to put a pause between the two and say, look, before jumping to the solution, are you sure you've got the right problem? Are you sure you're really dealing with the right issue? And can you pause and think, maybe this problem is just a little bit different in some way, just a little bit different from what some other problem might have been that you've experienced 5 years ago, 2 years ago, even 10 days ago? Could there be something different? Because if you are not sensitive to that micro difference that might be there today, your solution may not be appropriate. So the way I look at design thinking is, when you put a pause in your thinking and say, I'm not jumping from problem to solution, and I just put a pause there and say, look, just hold on for a minute. Figure out whether you got the problem in its right context. Have you understood it right? And then when you start looking at solutions, the most obvious solution is not the only solution that will work. Could there be other solutions as well? So it basically slows down your decision-making process in some way, but maybe it makes you take wiser decisions.
That's really well said, to be honest. That's really well said, because it's a pause. It allows you to, in a sense, you have to manage your own discomfort with not having a solution.
Yeah. And you have to tell yourself that the solution that came to my mind right now may not be the best solution. You're holding yourself back. So you might be a 45-year-old executive, you might be a 60-year-old leader of a big company, but even then, if you can pause and tell yourself, maybe I don't have the best answer, maybe I don't have the best understanding. The moment you can make yourself doubt that, the moment you can pause, I think you've taken the first very, very big step towards design thinking. So in today's context, Go ahead, please.
One of the things this reminds me of, and actually one of the reasons why when I was first introduced to design thinking a few years ago, I found it very exciting, was that whether you're working as, a coach or a facilitator, to be honest, some of the underlying principles, I'm not saying, all of design thinking is the same, but some of the underlying principles are similar. Like you pause, you divide that into, different kinds of thinking hats, if you like. So I know that you worked with, Bono, so you have a much deeper familiarity with it. But, when we're trying to work out a solution, whether it's in our individual capacity or as a team, we often get stuck in a groove. And that groove is familiar. It's not always the best groove, but it's our groove. So we kind of get stuck in it. And one of the things which coaching does as well as facilitation does is it takes you out of that groove and it opens the discussion in ways that you haven't explored before. So So, just from what I'm hearing you say, it sounds, almost parallel to some of what goes on in effective coaching and effective facilitation, and which is what allows people to come up with, solutions that are different.
Well, I would agree with you. It actually does. In fact, design thinking is never done alone. That's one fundamental fact. I can't be a design thinker all by myself. I have to enable other people to think similarly. And so there is this facilitation and coaching that is embedded in design thinking as well. So the principles have to overlap. You're absolutely right in your observation there. The other principle that we apply here is that you are not the only one with the answers. The way we articulate this, we say nobody is as clever as everybody. And the moment you start engaging other people in the conversation, you start looking at their perspective. You start looking at the world from their perspective, the problem from their perspective, the solution from their perspective. I think, as you also have experienced as a coach, we ourselves become enriched. Absolutely. And so one fundamental mindset that makes somebody a design thinker is this ability to accept a counter opinion as being equally correct as your own. So an opinion which is completely contrary to what you have may also be correct. And the moment you start accepting that, you become enriched because you're seeing something from somebody else's perspective, which in design thinking is broadly labeled as empathy, but I think it's much beyond empathy. It's also the willingness to, be humble, intellectually humble, and say, I don't have all the answers. I don't have to have all the answers. Maybe I'll never have all the answers. And maybe somebody else is equally correct. And so when you, sorry, go ahead, please.
I was going to say, do you think a time like today where, in a sense, we're in an unfamiliar place, and with a lot of ambiguous signals, to be honest, around us. So do you think that we are at a place which is particularly well suited for applying some of these principles? It's a leading question.
Equivocal, yes. If there is a time when this is relevant, it is now. And building on our conversation a minute ago, nobody has the answers. Nobody has all the answers. And if there are signals being delivered, there are weak signals, there are confusing signals, there is all kinds of misinformation, there is all kinds of confusion that is there, incomplete information, incorrect information, so much available, that if we were to rely only on what we are receiving, I think we would be deluding ourselves. And so everybody on this planet is receiving a different set of signals, and they are interpreting those signals differently. And they are reacting to those signals differently. And as they react, they're getting feedback and they're getting reacted to by the environment differently. If there was one time when we had to learn from each other, it is now. And so what design thinking does, is to engage the entire ecosystem and say, guys, all of us are experiencing this together. And all of us are getting a different experience of this. Can we put our heads together and figure out what the real issue is and then figure out what the best solution could be? And so this collaboration that is built into the whole psyche of a design thinking person, I think is the most appropriate tool at this stage, because if we can just work together, co-create stuff, we can co-analyze stuff, we can co-think stuff, we can, co-experiment and co-fail at some things maybe. I think the learning is going to get multiplied many-fold.
Yeah, I completely love what you're saying about, the fact that there are so many signals, everyone's seeing only a part of it.
Yeah.
So given the fact that, add to all of this, the fact that most of us are still working remotely across the world. So, it's like we have a small window through which we are seeing something. And there are many such windows which are receiving one small set of, ideas and information. And to take better decisions, the collaborative principle of design thinking is really, really helpful. One more thing which comes to my mind, and I want to know what you think about it, is design thinking has really been a buzzword for now, maybe about 3-4 years. And many, many organizations have trained like armies in design thinking. So, and I know you've spoken about it, about how some of the larger organizations may have had like hundreds of people trained in design thinking. What has been your experience? Has having, such large numbers of people trained in a particular design thinking style, have you seen it fundamentally impact the way leadership teams are making decisions?
The short answer is no. But the much deeper answer is why this has happened. See, most organizations have been structured for efficiency and manageability and therefore predictability. We are answerable to our shareholders and the market where we have to predict results. And the accuracy of prediction determines the bonus at the end of the day. So the whole ecosystem of a business is geared towards predictability, manageability, and efficiency. And therefore, you have standards like the ISO and CMM and so on and so forth, which basically focus on compliance. And so the entire management thinking process from top to bottom is on compliance. There's a process laid out, you've got to follow the process, don't ask any questions, end of the story. I can't take people who are seeped into that DNA and I can't take them into a 2-day workshop and teach them 5 steps of design thinking or 7 steps or 10 steps or whatever steps I'm thinking of, maybe 3 tools, and expect them to come out transformed when they have to go back into the same culture and the same work practices, and where they're expected to now suddenly become innovative, suddenly become creative, suddenly become design thinkers, and suddenly start solving problems that they thought was somebody else's problem. And so the big mistake that I think we have made is that we've exposed people to these 2 days or 3 days or 4 days or 7 days or whatever it is. And we got them all excited. And so they've got this amazing new toolkit, which at least in that workshop or that training program gave some amazing results and gave them a good feeling. But there's no context for applying it. And if they tried to apply it, they were very quickly told, don't waste your time. Because when you do design thinking, you are starting to open up areas that have not been opened up earlier. You're starting to ask all the awkward questions for which the answers are not very obvious. And very few leaders are ready to answer questions which they don't have ready answers to. Very few leaders have the humility to say, hey, that's a good question. Even I don't have the answer. Let's go and find the answer together. The leaders who have managed to make that jump and say any question is actually showing me a different way of looking at something. Somebody is asking me a question, which means that person's perspective is different from mine. He or she is noticing something that nobody else has noticed, and it's worth pursuing. Those leaders have actually made a difference. But where that acceptance of the fact that good questions can come from anywhere, and all questions are important because they force us to look at things differently. I think those are the companies that have succeeded, and there are very, very few of those. One more thing I'd like to share here is, all these companies that have set up, that have done this kind of training, and I can, off the hat, at least count 40, 45 during my own career that we've supported in setting this up and conducting these programs. They've all set up these beautiful design studios. So right in the middle of their highly compliant cubicle offices where everybody follows the same protocol, there is this little place called the design studio where there are no rules. The only rules are that you go in there, you have some fun, you use lots of post-its, and there's some music and free coffee and free drinks and so on, and some magic will happen there. It doesn't. It just doesn't happen there. So when you set up this kind of a play field, the children who go into the play field, for example, when they go into a sand pit, they have to be told it's okay to get your clothes dirty. It's okay to get sand in your hair and in your fingernails. It's okay to just go there and have fun. If you send somebody into a sand pit and say, look, if your clothes come out dirty, I'm going to hammer you. If you have hair, if you have sand in your hair, or you kind of mess up your clothes or mess up anything else, there's a penalty to be paid. I don't think the kids are going to play there. So these studios have become places for showing off. They've really not yielded any results.
That's a really deep one, Vijay, because underlying is, the fact that leaders, like all of us, have grown up with a certain set of ideas and a certain way of working, most of which runs quite counter to the fundamental ways of, looking at the world that design thinking promotes. And, leaders like all of us are, sort of prisoners of our own upbringing. And, the fact that the world has changed almost overnight. And I'm not just talking about, the pandemic, but just the fact that the pace of change around us is so much. And that has needed a different approach. Doesn't make it as easy for people like us who've grown up, with a linear way of looking at things, or feeling it's important to have answers, or you won't look so good if you don't have a smart answer right off the bat, or working as an individual, smart individual, rather than the collaborative tools. So I can see the challenge. I can see that would be a big challenge. Do you think it's going to be easier for younger people, though, who are entering maybe the workforce in a time when perhaps I think pretty much everybody knows that the past is not going to be a good indicator of the future. And that's not just about technology. It's going to be about looking at the world differently, thinking very differently. Do you think it's going to be easier with because you work a lot with young people as well?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think it's going to be easier for younger people, because suddenly there are no there are no role models available for them. So they pretty much have to feel their way forward. And in some ways, because I work with the education institution as well, I don't think we're preparing our youngsters for feeling their way around. I think we are still not giving them the tools and the confidence to say it's okay to make mistakes and bumble your way through. If you look at design thinking from a distance, that's pretty much what it is. You feel your way through. Keep failing, and whatever works, it moves you forward. We say, fail often and fail forward. It takes a lot of courage to do that, and for us to do it, we really have to rely on the next generation to sort of sort out the mess that we are leaving for them. We're really leaving a big mess for them. We expect them to sort it out and wade their way through. I think we need to start giving them safe spaces where they can evolve. And so I'm looking at your question in two perspectives. One is, are the leaders creating these safe spaces for our youngsters to evolve? And then once given the safe space, what should the youngsters do? The younger professionals, what should they be doing? So if the leaders can say it's okay to fail, as long as you don't repeat the same mistake twice, it's okay. Make new mistakes. But as long as you make a mistake, learn from it and come and tell me what you've learned, help me to evolve as well. It's okay. Go ahead, feel your way around. Because in today's ambiguous environment, nobody has the answers. You have to poke this animal to figure out how it will respond. And if you don't poke, if you just sit down and wait for things to happen, nothing will happen. You'll just get run over. And the younger generation today, the younger managers, the younger professionals today, they have the whole life ahead of them. They are rearing to go. They have all the energy, and they know that they can't sit idle. They can't do nothing. If we can give them a space to experiment and space to take the risks that we ourselves were not willing to take, just because the consequence on us would be far higher in terms of reputation and future compared to them, where we can forgive their mistakes because they're young. It's okay. Encourage them to make all the mistakes, learn from them, and move the whole world along. And if we can look at it from the perspective of the younger managers today, the younger leaders today, I'm reminded of this principle, the Japanese principle of Ikigai, where if you can define a significant enough purpose, it basically keeps you going. It gives you a purpose of waking up in the morning. And once it keeps you going, it gives you the energy and the ability to just keep going. So there are four fundamental questions that young professionals have to answer. Number one, what do they think they're good at? What are they really good at? And I'm not saying I'm good at accounting. That doesn't mean a thing. I'm good with numbers. Maybe that is more meaningful. What kind of numbers? Maybe that is even more meaningful. What can I do with numbers? Even more meaningful. So what am I good at? What do I really enjoy doing? Do I enjoy bossing over people? No, that's not good enough. Do I enjoy seeing people, smile, make them happier? Well, that's a little bit more meaningful. Do I enjoy people making fewer mistakes? Yeah, that's even more meaningful. So what do I really enjoy doing? So what am I good at? What do I really enjoy doing? What does the world need? So what are the job opportunities and what they're looking for? And then what are people willing to pay me for? Where can I make my money? If you can keep mulling over these questions in your mind, you have pretty much laid the foundation for your own continued evolution and, more importantly, relevance in the world. So you no longer have to live life. So if you have relevance in the world, there'll always be a demand for you. And so you keep tweaking these four dimensions to figure out, what is the best mix I can get of all these four, and define a purpose for yourself. I think that is a wonderful achievement if we can enable that to happen.
What I'm hearing you say is, and I think many people might resonate, that yes, design thinking as a tool has been hugely popular. There are many organizations which have trained many small armies in design thinking. It hasn't necessarily, however, impacted the way leadership teams think and make their decisions. As a result, organizations as a whole haven't necessarily transformed. It's only been something in pockets. And that's the challenge which young people have, that they're entering these systems which are stronger than any one individual. So as they learn design thinking, and they, if they do manage to apply those principles, they will need to, depending on the organization, find less resistance or more resistance. Yet apply it they must, because given the way the world is moving, design thinking and the many variants of it are perhaps one of the most valuable sets of tools in figuring out your way in a very, very ambiguous world. And yet you speak about how, irrespective of what's happening in an organization, at an individual level, for managing their own career, and you use the principle of Ikigai, which is quite interesting that you should do so. That's more my field. Let me just add a little bit to that. One of the things I feel would be really helpful for young people to apply design thinking in managing their own careers. So, we all know that many of the careers of the future are still to evolve. And as people, we ourselves will also evolve. Those of us, I mean, not me, but those who are starting off their careers now. And therefore, this constant experimentation of what kinds of careers, what kinds of roles will be truly satisfying. It's not a problem that one can necessarily know before one experiences, and which is really what, some of the design thinking principles are, that, as you said, you poke the beast to know what happens. So you experience it and then reflect on that experience to see what happens. Yeah. So,
can I just add one little thing there? See, today careers have become very personal. Earlier on, we used to say I have a career with company X. Now those company X's are a means to my career.
Yeah, true.
And so I'm not looking for a long-term stay with any company. So how are our policies evolving? How are our HR policies evolving, where we're not focused on longevity of an employee?
Yeah.
But enabling people to achieve their own goals.
Yeah. So
it's a fundamental.
I'm going to actually take a few questions which are around careers. Please. So Shilpi is asking, do we apply design thinking to find our Ikigai?
Well, I don't think there's a difference between them. There's no separation. You're just applying the principle of design thinking to yourself, because you're starting with yourself. What is it that I enjoy doing? What is it that I'm good at? So there's no separation.
And Shilpi, let me just add, there is this really nice book, if you want to take a look at, which is called Designing Your Life. And by the way, in episode 1, we also spoke about that a little bit, which is really about using design thinking to understand, through these different experiences, what is energizing me, what am I connecting with, where am I feeling the joy. So using some of those parts of design thinking that you don't necessarily know the answers, but you have the right questions and you experiment and discover and uncover the answer over a time. So I think, which is combining the two and saying that they are at their very core the same, if I understand what you're saying correctly.
Absolutely.
So let me see, what are the other questions? I see a question from Vijay Kumar. He says, is it not enough to have good regular thinking? Is it needed to think in a certain way, like design thinking probably suggests?
Okay, in the interest of time, let me give a very short answer to the question. It's a powerful question, but let's look at these two words called design thinking. Design is purposeful creativity. You're being creative for a purpose, and design requires you to be exploratory in nature. You're expanding your thinking. We call it divergent thinking. Thinking, on the other hand, tends to be evaluative and therefore conclusive. It's convergent thinking. Now, the reason why it's design thinking and not thinking design is because you want to diverge first and then converge, which means you first open up the issue before trying to close it. So the pause that we talked about earlier actually is embedded in the whole philosophy of design thinking. So when you're looking at a problem, you don't conclude very quickly to say, look, I know what the problem is. You first diverge. You first open your mind up to say, let me explore what all the problem could be. And I involve other people to understand that. And once we've all agreed what the problem actually is, that's the convergence part. Again, we evaluate together. That's the thinking part. Once you know exactly what problem you're trying to address, then let's look at all the possible options for solutions. not just the most obvious one. Let's expand that into more obvious solutions. And so we are diverging again. And then we converge into what the best solution could be.
Nice. Very nice. Let's see. So Anil is asking, future of industry, young people will only work with leaders who get design thinking. I'm working with most of the young team in oil and gas. Trust me, most of them are frustrated with present leader capabilities, and this may be a major challenge for employee engagement and retention. So I guess this is more an observation. Agree.
Yeah.
I think that's what Vijay is also saying. I think this is a fundamental challenge. To add one piece of what your response to Vijay, I think where tools like design thinking are so helpful in our regular thinking is that they divide the problem into manageable spaces which require very different types of thinking. So, I mean, every tool does it perhaps a little differently, but my very favorite is that, what is, what if, what hows, what works. So, that's one of many such frameworks. But I love the fact that when you are taking a problem that's complex, and you decide to live with the uncertainty of the solution because you don't know what will emerge at the end of it. They're just dividing it into distinct stages, which require different types of thinking styles or thinking hats in your Bono classification. It's really, really helpful. Incidentally, that's exactly what you do in a good facilitation exercise, because facilitation helps when people are stuck. And having a good facilitation exercise is about breaking the problem into different stages and then just focusing on one stage at a time, because what you get at the end of it is very, very different. The challenge with regular thinking, if there is such a thing, is that there's a temptation. Of course, all of us are different, but there's a temptation to try and address all these different stages all at once.
And quickly. Yeah.
And that's really, really, that's a challenge. So I think that's one of the differences.
Very well put. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. I realize we're at the end of our time. Thank you, Vijay, for coming in and sharing with our audience some of the reasons why design thinking might be particularly helpful in our designing the way we think from here on. I think we are at a time which is absolutely well suited for some of the key principles. So thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity. Lovely.
Thank you.
Bye.
So I loved the conversation with Vijay. I can tell you that Vijay is one of the smartest, most deep thinkers in design thinking I know. He's also one of the very, very few people who have such an honesty of passion that, he spent many, many months, maybe even years, exploring the topic of design thinking with some of the leading minds in the world. So he's traveled wherever there have been people who really understood the topic, and he's gone deeper into it than perhaps anyone else I know. So when he speaks, it's not about the tools, it's about the principles that underlie some of those tools. So I'm so happy that he was with us this time. For our next episode, we will actually be speaking a little bit more around the kind of thinking that's helpful in a situation like the one we find ourselves in today. And that will be around liquid thinking versus rigid thinking. And this time, we're not going to just look at individual mindsets, but we're going to look at organizational mindsets and what comes in the way of more liquid organizational types versus those which are in some way more solid state or more fixed. And we will have with us Professor Arun Sharma of the Miami Business School next Saturday. He'll be dialing in from Florida. So we will have our conversation in the evening. So it will be next Saturday at 6 p.m. And we will talk about liquid and rigid states of mind. So with that, thank you very much. Hope you found it useful. You can find all past episodes on the Uncube YouTube channel or on our website. And I'll put this right up by the end of the day. So thank you and see you next week.